Good morning. So, yeah, let's go ahead and begin. Let's begin with a little meditation to, focus our mind and set a motivation and kind of review a little bit what we went over yesterday. So get comfortable in your meditation posture. Remember the 7 points of the posture I described yesterday. And then, how to scan through your body, check for any tension, tightness, discomfort. And then visualize as you breathe, like as you inhale, drawing in rejuvenating energy of the air in the form of like white light, filling your entire body, and especially those areas of the body that are uncomfortable or weak or injured somehow. So like that, scan through the entire body briefly. You know, um, I don't know. When I'm talking about Dharma, generally, I mean, yeah, most Buddhist teachers, when they're giving a Dharma teaching or explaining Dharma, like we don't talk about the body very much. No, it's just like not seen as particularly significant or important. But there is, I mean, there is a whole topic, precious human rebirth. No. But especially, I know these days, many people, especially in Western society, they give so much attention to the body, and they love to. I mean, think in different ways about how to use the body and how the body functions to affect our emotions, our thoughts, our kind of self-image in negative way or positive way, and so forth. But I think, in the Buddhist view, when we think about, this just came to mind as I'm thinking about, scan through your body. But in the Buddhist view, like, yes, there is different advice about the body, like the importance of sleeping enough at the appropriate times, the importance of eating healthy food, because food is seen, eating improper food or food at the wrong times is seen as one of the major causes of disease. Then, of course, if we have disease, then it's an impediment to a Dharma practice. Like if we eat too much food, we feel heavy. If we eat like food that we can't digest easily, like really oily food, or fried foods, or highly processed foods. I mean, the Buddha didn't talk about highly processed foods because it didn't exist then, but he surely would now, because he did talk about like, food that's indigestible as being a major cause of disease, because you eat it and it just sits in your digestive system and then becomes putrid and rots and then poisons your blood, and then you become sick, right, in different ways. So, so for that reason, the Buddha, I mean, that's one reason the Buddha advised don't eat after midday, so that because if you have a lot of food in your digestive tract, when you go to sleep, it's just sitting there all night, and there's a chance it becomes like toxic and poisons your blood. Um, and then also the Buddha advised not to eat too much because it makes you heavy, and then also because you can't digest properly if you have too much food in your stomach. Um, but yeah, there's other, other some advice about taking care of the body. But really, the main thing in the Buddhist view is, especially as a human being, is just um, to, I mean, to feel how fortunate we are just to have a human body is something incredible. Because of course, in the Buddhist view, we're not always born as a human. Like we take rebirth in all the 6 realms of samsara, sometimes as an animal, sometimes as a hell being, sometimes as a hunger ghost, sometimes as a god or demigod, with a kind of body of light and so forth. But in all of those other forms, other than human, they're all almost impossible to practice Dharma with those kinds of bodies, right? So taking rebirth in another realm basically is defined by taking rebirth as the body of that kind of being. So To take rebirth as an animal means you have an animal body, right? To take rebirth as a hell being means you have the body of a hell being. To take rebirth as a god means you have the body of the god. Like, and then along with that body, you have a whole perception of the world that goes together with that kind of body. Just like if we took rebirth as a bee, it's kind of like, we could live in the same world as humans do, but it would almost be like it's a different world because your perception is so radically different, and your understanding of what the world that you live in is just different, right? If a bee, it's just all about like flowers, I guess, flowers and hive, no, and then what predators and prey, for bees that maybe eat other, I guess, yeah, that I don't know. Are there any bees that eat other insects? I'm not sure even, but mostly they and then stuff to build your hive. No, so it's just the perception is different. So there's no, I mean, like, imagine if you took rebirth as a bee, there's no space for Dharma practice. There's no opportunity even to think about Dharma. Like that just doesn't fit in your worldview. There is no idea of like, oh, I'm a bee and I'm suffering and I really want to be free from suffering, so I'm going to go to the what is it, Ocean of Compassion Buddhist Center and listen to a talk. And like, there's no idea. Or like, oh, I heard about the Dalai Lama and da, da, da. It doesn't fit in a bee's mind, right, at all. So, so when we think about, our body as we sit down to meditate and think about the posture and scanning through the body, we should be, it's from a Buddhist perspective, we should be feel incredibly fortunate just to have a human body, right? Because on the basis of having a human body, then we have human perception and we have a human mind, right? So, I mean, whatever rebirth we take, we have a mind. Like the stream of consciousness goes from birth to birth. If whether we take rebirth as animal or hell being or God or demigod, the stream of consciousness goes. But the way the mind, the capacity of the mind to experience different things varies radically in dependence upon what kind of body we take rebirth in. So independence upon having taken rebirth as a human means with a human body, then we have this human intelligence, right? Independence upon having a human brain and having human sense organs, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, and having human kind of instincts, in a way you could say, that we're social creatures. Mainly intelligence, though. We have intelligence to learn about, to talk about, to use language, to think about different things. And it's because we have a human body, in short, that we have opportunity to practice a virtue, to make a choice between virtuous actions and non-virtuous actions, ethical, moral behavior versus immoral behavior, actions that, and we can think about and analyze and explore the difference between, actions of body, speech, and mind that bring suffering to ourselves and others and bring well-being and happiness in different ways to ourselves and others. So, when we think about, being comfortable in the body, it's also good just to recognize, that we're so incredibly fortunate just to have a human body. Is something really, really precious. Anyway, so we go back to, yeah, just scanning through the body, and then gradually gather your attention on an object of placement meditation. Again, the one I introduced yesterday was watching the breath. Usually I suggest just to observe the whole process of breathing, because that's what's considered kind of easiest and best to reduce distracting thoughts, mental chatter. But yesterday I was suggesting you watch there's three main ways to observe the breath. One is observe the sensations of breathing here at the tip of the nostrils. Another is to watch the rising and falling of the abdomen. And then another is just to observe the whole process of breath, like as the air comes in and then goes out, in and goes out, to observe that whole process. So yesterday I was suggesting to try observing the breath at the tip of the nostrils. So if you like, you can do that again for a few minutes, or you can focus your mind on another object if you like. But let's practice placement meditation, just observing one object. So we decide for yourself what object of meditation you'd like to focus on. So that's one parameter. And then decide, this part, when you're meditating on your own, you decide for yourself how long you'd like to meditate. But since we're meditating as a group now, we all need to be on the same page. Right? So I decide the time parameter for you. So I'll say let's 3 minutes. Let's just observe an object of a placement meditation for 3 minutes. Mm. And then let's generate a positive motivation. Again, so spend yeah. One way to generate a motivation is to, yeah, think how incredibly precious we are to have this human rebirth. So thinking now, this time I've taken rebirth as a human, and I have set a healthy body, healthy mind, and I have leisure, an opportunity. So leisure to have, live in a peaceful place, have education. I have sustenance of life, food, shelter, education, supportive friends and family, community is all provided for. And then also that one is met, yeah, spiritual teachings in general. And especially Buddhism. If one has particular interest in Buddhism, one has had this encounter, this opportunity to meet with the Buddhist teachings, and from one's own side has some interest. And then also in a more broadly, one has a desire to seek a kind of a more meaningful, a deeper and lasting, more reliable source of well-being and happiness from within oneself. And has encountered some, good advice to how to cultivate that. So recognize, what an incredibly fortunate opportunity that we have now in this rebirth, with this human life, and how much, good we can accomplish for ourselves and also for others, to contribute to the lives of others in this life. And thereby, we can create so many causes of happiness for ourselves and happiness for others, not only in the present, but causes that will produce results, beneficial results, far into the future, in this life and in future lives. And then those results will enable us to have further opportunity to develop as people, to progress on the spiritual path further and further, and not only ourselves, but also others. We'll create opportunities for others. So looking on the one hand at the great opportunity and benefit that this rebirth we have now, this condition, the situation we have now as a human being offers. And of course, part of thinking of that is what's most meaningful for oneself to do with this life. So whatever we feel is most meaningful, then we should remember that regularly and aspire that whatever we do. So now in this session we're beginning today, that but it's the same, everything we do every day, that whatever we're doing now should contribute towards more and more accomplishing what we feel is most meaningful, most worthy of working towards. And then it's important also to remember that this opportunity we have as a human being now in this life, it won't last forever, right? It lasts at most 100, 120 years, and it will end in death, right? And when we die, we'll be separated from this body and separated from all that's familiar, separated from this kind of human perception, human of the environment and mentality, this identity that we have, independence upon this body, and independence upon our family and friends, and all the things that we're familiar with in this life. And then karma, will ripen to throw us into a rebirth in some future life. And it's not sure where, what kind of rebirth we'll take. So it's incredibly important to recognize, the limited time that we have to make the most of this opportunity we have now as a human being. And that brings some more urgency to our motivation and our sense of, what's a wise way to use the precious and short time that we have in this life. So you can reflect on those ways or some other ways to generate a positive motivation for this session. Okay, so relax your attention there. Yeah, so we continue. So we have, this session this morning from now until 1:30. So yeah, yesterday we talked through about the points of the posture, kind of how to set up a meditation session. Basically, maybe just to review that and maybe consolidate a little bit. That basically the way you set up a meditation session is, sit down on a comfortable seat, and then arrange your body in a comfortable posture, and then spend some time generating mental focus, doing placement meditation, and then generate a positive motivation for the session. And the order of those two, the positive motivation and then doing placement meditation, it's not fixed, right? I usually do placement meditation first because I think, for many of us, our mind's a bit distracted. So it's better to spend some time generating some focused attention. And then it makes generating a positive motivation a bit more powerful, I tend to think. But, sometimes if you just mainly want to practice placement meditation in a session, then it's probably better to generate the positive motivation first, right? Because otherwise it's just going to come right at the end, right before the dedication, right? And that doesn't work, right? So, so it's probably good in that case. Like, if you just want to spend the main meditation session, 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, just watching your breath, which is fine. No, that can be very helpful. Then it'd be better to generate a positive motivation first and then do, the main part of the meditation session. Anyway, but I will typically here, in the sessions I'm leading, typically we're mainly doing not, the main part of the session is not placement meditation, it's usually analytical meditation that we're mainly doing, right? So that's why I spend some time just generating focused attention, then generate a positive motivation. And then, well, in this session, like I'm talking, right? It's a teaching session. Then do the main part of the session. And then at the end, you dedicate, right? And the dedication is very similar to the ways of thinking, like in the context of the motivation, except the motivation comes at the beginning and the dedication comes at the end, right? You're dedicating the virtue you've acquired. So this is generally the way to set up a meditation session. And, in a larger context, if we think about, if we want to practice Buddhism, like, then that's kind of the way you arrange your day as well. You can think of each day, you begin by, getting up, doing some exercise, washing up a little bit, whatever, brushing your teeth, and then sitting down to do a meditation session. And well, even at the beginning of the day, just generate a positive motivation. Spend some time when you first get up in the morning, then think about, what's my motivation for doing all the different things I want to do today. And then, focus your attention a bit. And then if you want later, do a meditation session. If you don't have time, okay. Then with that positive motivation, you do all the things you do in that day. And then at the end of the day, before you go to sleep at night, then make prayers and dedicate. By the force of all the virtue I've created today, may this and this and this come about. Also, at the end of the day, it's excellent to do some purification practice. So at the end of the day, also to reflect back and see any mistakes we made, anything that we did that perhaps was non-virtuous or harmful to others, harmful to ourselves, and generate regret for that, and then do some practice like reciting the Vajrasattva mantra or meditating on emptiness, or reciting the Sutra of the Three Heaps, reciting the names of 35 Buddhas, or some other purification practice to purify the negative karma we created during the day. Because all of us, we create negative karma every day, because afflictive emotions uncontrollably arise in our minds. And then, we do things motivated by anger or attachment and so forth. So it's good to do some purification practice at the end of the day, and then dedicate. And then, go to bed. Also, go to sleep with a wholesome motivation for sleeping. Thinking that something like, I'm tired at the end of the day. It's impossible to practice Dharma, and it's very difficult to do things to benefit myself or others if I'm exhausted. So I need to rest. It's important to rest and to sleep. So in order that I can continue my Dharma practice and my engagement in virtuous activities tomorrow, then I'll rest tonight. So it's very good to go to sleep with a positive motivation like that. And then in the morning you wake up and do the same thing over like that. Okay, so that's kind of how to set up a meditation session and how to approach like organizing your day, the Buddhist practice. And then we looked at, what did we do? Yeah, we spoke a lot about one way of generating a motivation yesterday, thinking of long-term benefit for self, for others. And then I talked about Buddhism in general, and I comparing Buddhism to other religious traditions. And then, just some different features of Buddhism that, the law of cause and effect is considered kind of fundamental moving force, creative principle in the world, and then other things related to that. And then different aspects of Buddhism. You can think about Buddhist religion, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy, and draw from different aspects of Buddhism. Yeah. I guess and then I talked about the word, I explained the etymology of the word Buddha, or in Tibetan, Sangye. Maybe one last thing to say, because Buddhist in Tibetan, the term for Buddhist is a Nangpa, or a word for Buddhism is Namba Sangye, or Nangcho. But it means Nang, this word in Tibetan means inner. So the word in Tibetan for Buddhist is I mean, literally it's translated as an inner being, but it has two different connotations. One is just, it means kind of those within the fold, like within refuge, as opposed to those who are non-Buddhist, who would be like outsiders, or called outsiders. Um, so one way, and a more, I mean, it's a less significant way, is just to think about, it's just like that, that there are Buddhists and then others. But another connotation of that word, nang, because it means inner, right, is like an inner being. So another connotation is that Buddhists, they primarily, their spiritual practice, the focus of their religious practice is primarily internal, in relation, in the mind, transforming the mind, and in relation to oneself, transforming as a person. That's really the focus of the practice. Yes, we go for refuge to the Buddha, the external Buddha, and then his teachings and the community, which are external. That's one way of going for refuge, the typical way. But it's not held that like the Buddha, as I mentioned yesterday, from his side can like kind of do anything for us apart from teach the Dharma. It's up to us to do things for ourselves, to transform ourselves. So in that way, Buddhism is like an inner religion. Whereas you think in most other religious traditions, there's a lot of focus external towards relating to a god or relating to priest or something, and doing external practices with the thought that that's going to help me, that this God who's all powerful will be able to help me and change things for me, make my life kind of better. Not that there isn't any internal practice, but the focus is a bit different on external versus internal. So that's another connotation of, a kind of, or a bit of a difference between Buddhism and other religions. Anyway, so now I thought to today turn to the life of the Buddha a little bit, look at the life of the Buddha, and then, then some of the main things that the Buddha taught and the example he set. I guess maybe a nice segue is this verse also in terms of thinking out Buddhism is focused inwardly on the mind. Then is something in a verse found in the Dhammapada. So all the verses in the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada it's common to both the Theravada tradition, also the Mahayana tradition. Maybe a bit later I'll explain about these different traditions, how they arose. But there are slightly different versions, but all the verses in the Dhammapada came from specific sutras that the Buddha taught. And then it's a compilation of important verses, important pieces of advice that the Buddha taught in verse. He spoke in verse that are collated. So one famous verse from the Dhammapada, and I don't remember what sutra it's from offhand, but is where the Buddha said, this is one verse that we recite in the prayers, typical prayers before a teaching occasion. We always recite. Actually, I'll show it to you. Let me just pull up on my computer and then I'll show you the verse. No. So one reason usually when I explain verses, I try to show them to you, is so that you can use them in your own practice later on. So you know where to find it, and then, then you can refer to it and use them. There it is. I know one thing I found really helpful. I mean, in the past, when I started, most people didn't have. When I started practicing Buddhism, people didn't have laptops or smartphones. So we would like write things down, no? And then there was paper copies of everything, right? So you'd end up, for many, many years, I had like, most people, when they decide what prayers and practices they want to do, they gather those together. And then sometimes when the verses like this that I'm going to show you, then they find a copy somewhere and write down, or just make a photocopy and then keep in their practice booklet. And then sometimes, read that and meditate on it. But now what I did probably from, I don't know, maybe 5, 10 years ago. I made a Word document because I got tired of carrying a whole bunch of paper around everywhere I go. So I just made a Word document and then, but I find that kind of nice because it's much more flexible. You can put in images, you can edit in different ways. So yeah, I'd suggest you do that. No, so like verses like this or others that you come across that you think you'd like to use for your regular daily contemplation sometimes, then yeah, copy paste from different files and make your own Word document. And then you can always update it as you go. And then I save it as a PDF and then use it. So because I usually do my prayers from my iPad. But I don't know why it's different to save it as a PDF, but whatever, that's what I do. And then use that. Maybe because if it's a PDF, it appears in the same format on any device that you look at it on, right? But yeah, I would suggest you do that. When you also in your readings, sometimes you're reading something, a book, or attending a teaching, and you see some verse or some phrase or a paragraph or something that you find very it moves your mind, no, very inspiring or very powerful for your own mind. Then save it, no, copy paste it to some file, and then add it to your own daily prayer practices and use it. So, but this is one I'll show you here. So this is the well, I'll show you just where this is first. What is page 231? Come back. So this is the FPMT Retreat Prayer Book, which is available for free download at the FPMT website. And then within it, there are the, let's see, it's the prayers before the teachings. It's down here somewhere. Oh, it's way down. I'm missing it. Hold on, where is it? Oh, here it is. Prayers for teaching occasions. The beginning of the teachings. There we go. And then, so there's a praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. And then the Heart Sutra. And right, so it's this verse here. Yeah. So this is a verse from the Dharmapada where the Buddha summarizes the essence of his own teachings. It says, do not commit any unwholesome actions. That means non-virtuous actions or destructive actions, harmful actions of body, speech, and mind, like killing, stealing, lying, so forth. So do not commit any unwholesome actions. Engage in perfect wholesome actions. So that means virtuous actions, right? And then how do you do that? In order to do that, you have to subdue your mind thoroughly. It means make the mind, bring your own mind under your own control, right? Make the mind pacified and peaceful is the meaning of subdue there. To make the mind peaceful and joyful and happy and serviceable, that in order to so that you can easily use it in virtue, right? And then it says this is the teaching of the Buddha, right? So because I was saying that in way Buddhism is translated in Tibetan, it says Nangpa, or Buddhist is called a Nangpa, inner being, because the focus of one's practice is internal. And here you see that reflected, right? The Buddha saying the essential practice of a Buddhist is do not commit any unwholesome actions. Engage in perfect, wholesome, or beneficial actions. And then how do you do that? In order to do that, to subdue your mind thoroughly. So the focus is inward, transforming one's own mind, right? This is the teaching of the Buddha. Okay, so then to the Buddha, like who is the Buddha? And what, how did he become the Buddha? And again, if you have any questions, just raise your hand or speak up as we go along. Yeah, so there's basically among Buddhists, there's two different views of, what Shakyamuni Buddha was. On the one hand, so the view that, I'll explain mainly is what's accepted by, in the Mahayana Buddhism, is that actually Shakyamuni Buddha, he took rebirth as Prince Siddhartha, and then showed the aspect of becoming enlightened. But that was just a display in order to teach others, to show other people how to practice the path. It's not that he actually became enlightened in that life. He actually became enlightened long before that, right? And then was appearing in the world in this specific way, to show others as a teaching for others. So that's one view of Buddhism, that Shakyamuni Buddha was enlightened long ago, right? But on that view also, he was an ordinary being at some time in the past and then practiced the path and then became enlightened, right? But it's just that it wasn't in that life particularly. And another view, which is more the view that is more common like in Theravada tradition, although even there I'm not sure it's uniform a view, but is that that actually Prince Siddhartha was an ordinary being, was an ordinary person like us, and actually did become enlightened under the Bodhi tree. That actually is when he became enlightened. He hadn't become enlightened before that. Yeah. So there's these two different views on what Shakyamuni Buddha was. And then, just while we're talking about that, there's also two different views on like what happened when Shakyamuni Buddha died, right? Because he lived, so he took rebirth, and then he lived until about the age of 80, and then passed away, right? So in the Mahayana tradition, they'll always say he showed the aspect of passing away, meaning that he didn't actually die. He showed the aspect of dying. So that also was an appearance to teach beings, but as a person, he continued, right? His stream of consciousness continued on after that parinirvana, and continues until now and still exists. So in the Mahayana view, the Shakyamuni Buddha, the mind stream of that person, Shakyamuni Buddha, still exists now and is still engaged in activities to benefit sentient beings in different ways that we don't know because we're not clairvoyant. Whereas in the Theravada view, so the view you find like in among Buddhists in like Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, is that Shakyamuni Buddha, he was enlightened in that life, and then when he passed away, his continuum ceased to exist. So his stream of not only his body, ceased to function, but also his stream of consciousness stopped, right? And so as a person, he completely just ceased to exist, and that he doesn't exist now, right? So that's a different view, right? And there's reasons they have those different views, but I won't get into that now. Yeah, so it's a bit different views of what the Buddha was. So I'll explain from the point of view of the Mahayana tradition, which is what is foremost in among the Tibetan people that I studied with. Okay, so in that view, then Shakyamuni Buddha is a person that he was an ordinary being like us. He practiced the path, became enlightened long ago, and then he and also long ago he made prayers that in the future he would appear in this world system and teach the Dharma at a time when it's suitable, right? So so before 2,500 years ago, Buddhism, like 3,000 years ago, Buddhism was not something known about on planet Earth, right? There was no Buddhism on planet Earth at that time. And then about 2,500 years ago, then, Shakyamuni Buddha appeared. So the Mahayana view is that he saw that the minds of beings on Earth, in this, on Earth, were ripe to be able to receive, instructions, teaching about Buddhism. And so he deliberately, this enlightened being, deliberately took rebirth, not through the power of karma, but through the power of his own prayers and intentions. Then he took rebirth, it's like a miraculous rebirth, you could say, to this king and queen in northern India, King Shuddadana and his wife, Queen Mayadevi, I believe. Mayadevi, yeah, Queen Mayadevi. So, and it said, yeah. Well, I mean, I won't go into all this detail, but typically when we look at the life of the Buddha, um, it's described through what's called the 12 deeds, right? The 12 deeds of a Buddha. Um, and these are, so like the first deed, I mean, there's a little debate about exactly what they are, but the idea is that, again, like these are 12 deeds that when an enlightened being appears in a world system where Buddhism doesn't exist, and they are the first one to turn the wheel of Dharma, means to teach the Buddhist path in that time and place. They appear in what's called a supreme emanation body, right? A supreme emanation body. So the idea is that enlightened beings, they can emanate in different ways. They can send out physical forms and appear in all different kinds of physical forms to suit different needs of sentient beings. But the supreme emanation body is like this kind of form that Shakyamuni Buddha took, where they appear in, they appear in a world system in a time and place when Buddhism does not exist. And they newly teach the Dharma in that world system. And they have marks and signs. They have particular physical features that make them very attractive and impressive to beings of that place. And then there's certain features like of the way they take rebirth. They always take rebirth either as a Brahmin or as a Kshatriya, like in a high caste, or you can think a powerful and influential family, right? And then, anyway, there's other features, but the idea is that they always show these 12 deeds. So so the Shakyamuni Buddha is held to be a supreme emanation body. And then a supreme emanation body, in whatever world system and at whatever time and place they take rebirth, they always show these 12 deeds. And so the first deed is that before they took rebirth in that place, they were abiding in like a pure land. And then they leave that pure land, the Tushita heaven, actually it's called, there's a specific pure land. They leave that and then they take rebirth. And then also, so this relates to the Buddha's birth story, that their mother to be has a dream of a white elephant entering her womb. That's also one of the 12 deeds that they enter. They deliberately, through the power of prayer and merit, they enter their mother's womb, and she has a dream of like a white elephant entering her womb, and other auspicious dreams. And then, then I don't remember. I don't remember all of the 12 deeds. But anyway, long and short though, I'll just make the story a bit short now, without going through all the details. But these are things, you can read about. There's different places you can read more details about. Yeah. But so, so famously then, the Buddha's mother, Queen Maya Devi, she, as was customary in ancient India, then when she was, fully pregnant with her child to be, then she went to her parents' home, her maternal home, her birth mother and father. She was going to her birth mother and father's home to give birth there, right, so that her mother could help care for her through childbirth, and then with the new baby. So she was going from the Shakya kingdom, I forget the name of the city, to Kapilavastu is the city where she was from. And then there was so she was walking together with her attendants, and then there was like a park, a garden, kind of forest on the way, Lumbini. And then so they decided to rest there for a while. And then there she suddenly went into labor and then gave birth. So it's said that the Buddha came from her side, right? There's a famous picture you can see of this where she's holding a tree, kind of holding her womb, and then said the Buddha came from her side. Now, why did they say that? Like, I don't know. But I don't know. It's probably a bit of, I don't know. It's reality or it's just mythology. I'm not sure. It all kind of gets mixed up. It's 2,500 years ago, right? And then it said also in the Mahayana sutras, they say after the Buddha immediately after taking birth, that he takes 7 steps, I think in maybe all 4 directions, and he says like, "I am supreme in this world," right? Also, if that's mythology or that's reality, I don't know. um, yeah, and also maybe, I mean, because a lot of these stories you have to take into account. In the Buddhist view, there's different levels of perception, right? There's a perception of a very ordinary being, like me, or a perception of someone whose mind is much more clear and clairvoyant. And maybe, they can see other facets of reality that an ordinary being can't see. Like it's also said that gods of different realms came to Lumbini that time and made offerings to the Buddha. Of course, an ordinary person like us, we can't see that, right? But someone with clairvoyance and more merit, maybe they could maybe see that, experience that. Anyway, so the Buddha said to have taken this miraculous birth, and then so before, when Queen Mayadevi was pregnant, then the wise men who were would give counsel to the king, to King Shuddhodana. They had told him that, oh, your wife is pregnant with an exceptional being, and he will either become a world monarch or a renowned religious teacher, like a world renowned religious teacher. And so, of course, since the king, it's his first son, right? He doesn't have any children before that, I believe. And so he wants his son to take over the throne, right? Take over the reign of the kingdom. So, actually, I made a mistake. Maybe it was after the Buddha was born. Then the wise men came to check the horoscope of the baby, and at that time, I think is when they told the father that. I don't think it was why the queen was pregnant. I think it was after he was born. But after he was 2 weeks after he was born, the Queen Mayadevi passed away, I guess. And that also raises questions, like, was it complications from childbirth? Like, why did she pass away? But if the Buddha was just born from her side, yeah, I don't know. Was that part of I don't know. But anyway, for 2 weeks after the Buddha was born, Queen Mayadevi passed away. And then her younger sister, the king took her younger sister as his wife, and she became like the wet nurse and the stepmother of the Buddha. So Prince Siddhartha was raised by his aunt, actually, his mother's younger sister, I believe, whose name is, do you remember? Prajapati, who became the first fully ordained woman later on. Yeah, later she became the first woman to receive full ordination as a nun, Prajapati. Oh yeah. So anyway, there's this prediction. This is important in Buddha's life. There's this prediction that either he's going to become a world ruler, a powerful ruler, or he's going to become a famous religious teacher. And the father wants him to become a famous ruler, right? A great ruler. So then he, consults with his advisors and so forth, and they conclude that, well, a person becomes a religious teacher because they see the suffering of the world, and then they want to do something to relieve the suffering of others. They want to escape the suffering of samsara. And so if we prevent him from seeing the suffering of the world, then he won't have any inclination to enter religious life, right? And rather, if we surround him with pleasure and just, the pleasures of life, good food, good friends, attractive people, healthy, and, just all the kind of pleasures of life, then he'll be enticed by that and just want to get more of that and not into religious life. So that's the kind of their plan. As Prince Siddhartha's growing up, then they just surround him, make sure that he doesn't see anyone who's sick or elderly or dying or impoverished and so forth. And they just surround him with pleasure. And so, yeah, this is another one of the 12 deeds that a Buddha shows is mastery of like arts, mastery of kind of sports and arts. So like archery and swordsmanship and wrestling and so forth, that they should have physical kind of prowess. Anyway, so Prince Siddhartha receives the typical education of a prince at that time in martial arts, and then also in like Hindu, also teachings of the Sanskrit and the Vedas and so forth. It's a Hindu family, right? As is everyone there in ancient India at that time. But then, and then he, yeah, then anyway, gradually he takes a wife, you know, as expected of a prince. And it said, actually, the Buddha said, he taught in sutras that his wife, he and the woman he took as his wife, Yasodhara is his name, Yasodhara. They had a connection from many past lives. They'd been husband and wife in many past lives, or had a connection in different ways. Anyways, Yasodhara is the princess from a neighboring royal family. Anyway, so he takes a wife, and then they becomes married, and then she becomes pregnant, and he has a son. Rahula is his son, who also, Yasodhara also became later a fully ordained nun. His son also became a monk. And they achieved arhatship, I believe. But then the Buddha, but his father builds these different palaces, one for each season, one for the winter, one for the summer, one for the rains, and one for the autumn season. And then he and his family, they live between these different palaces. But again, all this time, never seeing the ordinary hardships that regular people experience. So in this time, when after he becomes married and then has a son, he becomes, he naturally, he wants more autonomy. He wants to be able to travel around his kingdom and see like what's the state of affairs. But his father prohibits him from going out from the palace grounds, because his father remembers his prophecy from when he's young, that if he sees the suffering of others, then he might go forth as a religious person. So his father prohibits him from going out. And of course, I mean, he's like 20 years old by now. He's like, come on. So then he sneaks out. He famously sneaks out in the middle of the night with his attendant on his in his chariot with his horse, and his attendant Chanda, I believe. Yes, his attendant. What's the name of the horse? The horse is named Chanda. The horse is also, he's got a name too. Anyway, it said, I'll come back to that. So he sneaks out with his attendant Chanda in the middle of the night, and then goes to see like what's going on with people. And so it's famously said that when he leaves the royal grounds, like for the first time, then on one of these 4 different occasions when he went out, on one occasion he sees someone who's sick, and he's never seen someone who's sick before. So he asks his attendant Chanda famously, like, what is this? And Chanda explains, this is a person who's their body's racked with illness, right? And they're very sick, so maybe they're bedridden or something, and maybe have rashes or whatever. But it's like obviously they're very ill, very sick, and have disease. And then Prince Siddhartha has never seen that before, and Chanda explains, well, this is something that happens to all people. All people eventually get sick, and so that's kind of a shock to Prince Siddhartha. And then another trip, he sees someone who's very elderly, and walking on a cane and hunched over, and gray hair and wrinkly skin and aging spots and so forth. And and then I'll also ask what he's never seen something like that, and ask Chanda, what is this? And Chanda explains, this is a very elderly person. They're suffering from aging, and that happens to eventually. That happens to everyone. If they don't die young, everyone becomes like that. And so this is also a shock to him. And then on a third trip, they go out and they see a corpse being carried through the street, as is custom in India. When someone passes away, they wrap the corpse in white cloth, like shrouds, and then carry them in a procession to the street. And they're usually followed by their, all their relatives and friends who are weeping and mourning and showing their grief. And then they carry them to a funeral pyre or to a riverside, and put the body dispose of the body. And so they come across a procession like this of a body being carried through the street. And again, Prince Siddhartha asks, what is this? And Chanda explains, this is a corpse of someone who's died recently. And then Prince Siddhartha was like, and then Chanda explains that this happens to everyone. Everyone's life ends in death. So then Prince So and again, Prince Siddhartha is shocked that this is what all of us end in. All of our lives end in death, and so he's wondering, well, how is there a way to be free from these sufferings of sickness, old age, and death? And this is a burning question in his mind. And then on the fourth trip, when they go out, then they happen to see a wandering mendicant, like a yogi or a rishi, a meditator, someone who's devoted their life to meditation and spiritual practice. And Prince Siddhartha notices that this person seems to have a kind of calm and demeanor and composure and a sort of peaceful radiance that other people don't have. And he asked Chanda, what is this? And Chanda said, oh, that's someone who's gone forth from the home life and that they've devoted their life to meditation and spiritual practice, right? And they're striving to achieve moksha, to achieve liberation from samsara, right? And then so Prince Siddhartha, that's where he gets the first idea that maybe he wants to try to do that, to find a way to free not only himself, but also all those he loves, his wife and his child and his family and friends, to see if there's a way that they, not only him, but all of them can be free from the sufferings of sickness, old age, and death. Right? And then, of course, he thinks about that for a while, and then gradually he decides to try that. So after asking for permission from his father, and the father says, no, you need to stay here and take over the reins of the kingdom. I'm getting old, and so forth. But then he decides to do that anyway, to go forth into the religious life. So then one night he, with his horse, whose name I don't remember, but he rides his horse, leaves the palace, and then goes to a forest and meets a hunter, and then exchanges all his princely robes, which are silken and jewelry and so forth, for the simple robes, for the simple clothes of a hunter. Exchanges those, and then he famously kneels down finds a stupa in the forest. Because in the Buddhist view, you wonder, stupa, but in the Buddhist view, although Buddhism exists now in the world from 2,500 years ago, this is not the first time Buddhism existed in the world. So how this jives with Darwinian evolution, I don't know, but anatomical modern humans are from 250,000 years ago, so there's a bit of leeway there. But it's it's said that Shakyamuni Buddha is the fourth Buddha to appear in this world system right at this time. So it said actually there's three Buddhas who came and taught Buddhism before on planet Earth, I suppose. Anyway, so he finds a stupa in the forest which contains the relics of one of the previous Buddhas. And then he kneels before that stupa and cuts off his long hair, right? Which is also a sign of royalty, I guess, to have long hair. And he cuts off his hair and then, wears these robes of the simple hunter and then pledges to go forth as a renunciate, to live a life of begging for alms and just sleeping outdoors or wherever, he's offered a place to sleep, and devoting his time and energy to the spiritual path, to meditation and practicing the spiritual path. So that's one of the 12 deeds, is going forth as renunciate is one of the 12 deeds. And then the second, I think the one after that is practicing austerities, I believe, for 6 years. So then Prince Siddhartha, he seeks out the most renowned spiritual teachers of his day, whose names I don't remember. There's a record of them, but they're famous Hindu teachers, spiritual teachers in that area of northern India. And then he goes to one and learns all the meditation practice that one has to teach. And apparently that enables him to develop I think the fourth yana, although I'm not sure. There's these three different levels of three concentrations, they're called, of the form realm, and then there's four concentrations of the form realm and four concentrations of the formless realm. Anyway, the first teacher enables him, that practice enables him to develop one of those concentrations, a very deep level of meditative concentration. But that's as far as that teacher can guide him, because that's as far as that teacher himself has attained. And so Prince Siddhartha, within a few months, he develops that level of concentration, but then can see that this also, it's even with that level of concentration, when one dies, one will still take rebirth again. So then he leaves that teacher and goes seeking another teacher. And then that teacher can lead him to a higher level of concentration. I think one of the concentrations of the formless realm. And he quickly masters that. And then that teacher actually asked him to stay and become his like co-leader of the community and to take over leadership of his community when he passes away. But Prince Siddhartha could also see that that level of concentration alone will not enable him to escape rebirth and thereby sickness, old age, and death. And so he leaves that teacher and then goes to meditate on his own in a forest and meets, I think, 5 companions who have also he ends up meditating in a forest along the banks of the river Neranjana, Neranjana, which is near current-day Gaya in Bihar. And Gaya is an ancient city. Already at that time, Gaya was a city, right? The city of Gaya appears in many of the Buddhist sutras. So the Buddha was meditating with 5 companions on the banks of the river Neranjan, and they had the idea that in order to be free from suffering, well, they had the idea already that suffering arises due to karma, due to negative karma oneself has created. This is not an original Buddhist idea. But they had the idea that to exhaust that karma, one should voluntarily endure suffering, right? If one voluntarily endures different hardships, then that will exhaust the negative karma one's created in the past. And then as that karma becomes lighter and lighter and lighter, then one can become liberated from samsara. And so they engage in fasting, right? Severe austerities, primarily of fasting and not laying down, not sleeping, and so forth, which of course entails a lot of hardship. So there's a famous statue created in the Gandharva kingdom, which is like current-day Swat Valley area in Pakistan, which was ancient Bactrian Buddhist kingdom. But there's a famous statue there in this beautiful shiny black stone of the fasting Buddha, of the Buddha at this period, during the 6 years of practicing austerities, and you can see it's said that his stomach, he became so thin that you could see his backbone through his stomach. His belly was so sunken, his eyes were deeply sunken. You could see all of his ribs, and he became very emaciated. In short, but it said he practiced austerities for 6 years. So this is another of the 12 deeds to practice austerities. But then became so weak from fasting that he would regularly fall unconscious, faint and fall unconscious. And then gradually he could see that in that state, physically he's so weak that his mind is also not clear. And so his concentration is not good because he doesn't have the energy to concentrate. And even when he is concentrated, there's no energy to recognize anything clearly. The mind just becomes muddled. I mean, we can see that when we are tired and hungry, we can see how the mind becomes very difficult to focus on anything. Mind becomes unclear. So then he realized. So he decided, like, this is not the way to liberation from samsara. If the mind is just unclear, that's not helping me achieve liberation. So he decided to take food again, and then so the first food he took was famously offered by this cowgirl. Sujata. Yeah, Sujata is very famous in India, Sujata. You see many things named after Sujata, especially around in northern India, around in the Ganga River Valley. Yeah, Sujata actually, I believe that she was sent to that I think she was the servant of a mistress, like a woman in a wealthy family who was trying to become pregnant with a child and was not having success, was not able to become pregnant with the child. And so the mistress, I believe, there was making offerings to like a tree or a spirit in a tree. So sometimes it's common, even now in India, when you see a tree that's unusually like kind of healthy and big, and impressive and growing like with great kind of vigor and abundance, then people feel like, oh, there must be some powerful deities who inhabit that tree to make it be able to grow so magnificently compared to all the other trees around. So people will make offerings. They feel like, oh, that's a very auspicious thing, that particular tree. And then people will make offerings to the tree. So it said that the mistress of Sujata, I believe, had decided, was making offerings to the spirit of this tree in order to help her become pregnant with a child. And so one day she sent Sujata to make offerings to the tree, and Prince Siddhartha was sitting beneath the tree meditating, but he's so emaciated that he looks almost like unhuman. And so Sujata thought that here's the spirit, he's the spirit of the tree, and I'm in the tree. Anyway, so she put the offerings there, offered it to him, and then he took that, and who took this kirt, it's like a very rich mixture of rice boiled in milk, and flavored with like saffron and cardamom and other things. And so he took that and immediately felt like great energy like come to his body because from this rich food, and felt so much energy kind of course through his whole system. And then when he sat down to meditate, he could meditate like much better than before when he'd been so weak. So then he decided that, and this is the first mention of the middle way, that the best way to practice is a middle way between hedonism on one side, just indulgence of sense pleasures, and severe asceticism on the other side. That one should pick a middle way where one nourishes and cares for one's body so you have vigor, but don't go overboard and just try to seek pleasure just from sense or hedonistic kind of pursuit. Yeah, that might be one of the 12 deeds also. I'm not sure. But anyway, then shortly after this, then the Buddha or Prince Siddhartha can see he quickly makes a lot of progress in his insight on the spiritual path, and he can see that soon he will completely overcome, completely purify all the stains of samsara and become enlightened. So then he goes to the Bodhi tree, the famous Bodhi tree, and there, there's an elaborate explanation of what happened there. But there, within a few days, he achieves full enlightenment, and then dwells in that area for 49 days after he's enlightened. And then, to make a long story short, because it's time for a break soon. Then he teaches after achieving enlightenment. So enlightenment, of course, is one of the 12 deeds. I think it's like the 8th or so. There's a lot more that come before he's enlightened. But after he's enlightened, then he teaches. He begins teaching the Dharma. He gives the first teaching in Sarnath, which is about 4 days' walk away near current day Varanasi, which at that time was also a famous city. It's one of the most ancient cities in the world, Varanasi. He famously, he teaches these five meditators who'd been meditating, practicing austerities with him earlier. They're his first 5 disciples. So, and he teaches the Four Noble Truths to them, and then goes on to gain more and more disciples, more and more followers, and teaches for the next 40 years, all around, wandering around the Ganga River Valley, teaching in different places and staying in different places, and amassing more and more disciples until when the time he passes away, the relics, his body was cremated on a pyre, and the relics, the bits of bone and other things that arose in the fire that remained of his body afterwards, they were divided in 8 portions among the rulers of 8 different kingdoms. So he had become kind of the foremost, by the end of his life, he'd become the foremost spiritual teacher of eight different kings and ruling kind of classes in the 8 different kingdoms around the northern India. So that was his final deed, was to enter parinirvana. And that's also held to have been like a voluntary act in order to show others that life is impermanent. Nothing lasts forever, and therefore we need to put effort into practicing now while we have the opportunity. Okay, so that's the Buddha's life story, in short. Any questions about that, briefly, before we take a break? I think.
So There is a enlightenment and nirvana, right? Those two mean different.
Yeah.
Could you help
Okay.
understand?
So what's the difference between enlightenment and nirvana? Then Steve has a question after. Steve has a question also. You give the mic to Steve. Yeah, Steve has a question. Yeah. Yeah, this is a common question that comes up. And yeah, what's the difference between enlightenment and nirvana? Yeah, typically when we say enlightenment, we mean um, like full enlightenment. Actually, enlightenment and nirvana, they both have different levels of meaning. But typically, when we say enlightenment, it means it means the abandonment of all obscurations and all faults, and the perfection of all positive qualities. And one, I guess, primary feature of enlightenment is the mind is completely free of any obstacle to knowing anything, right? So an enlightened being is said to be omniscient, right? They know everything, in short, right? Whereas someone, and they've developed all positive qualities, and one of the foremost is, of course, the qualities of the mind, and 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 one foremost quality of the mind is wisdom, knowing everything, right? So omniscient, and also having perfect compassion, and perfect clairvoyance, and also being able to emanate in countless forms to benefit beings. In short, I guess they've achieved the four bodies of a Buddha. Is another way to think about it. They achieved the four bodies of a Buddha. Whereas with someone who's achieved just nirvana, so usually when we say nirvana, it means just freedom from samsara, right? They've abandoned the causes, the afflictive emotions, and the seeds of those that cause one to take rebirth in samsara. But they haven't abandoned, there's a more subtle level of obscurations called knowledge obscurations that they have not abandoned. And so they still have obscurations to knowing things. So they're not omniscient, right? There's still obstacles they can't know as much as a fully enlightened being. And they don't have other abilities. And you can kind of see this even in the Pali Canon, in the sutras. You see that the Buddha has much more ability as a teacher than Shariputra or Moggallana, right? So even in the Pali Canon, in the sutras, also in the Mahayana sutras, like Shakyamuni Buddha has much more kind of impressive abilities, impressive appearance, and impressive skill as a teacher that Shariputra and Moggallana and all his other disciples don't have. They're arhats. They've achieved nirvana, but not full enlightenment, right? Yeah. So that's the typical way we use the words enlightenment and nirvana. But in some more like technical contexts, sometimes enlightenment is also described as there being different levels of enlightenment. And one of those is more like, the enlightenment of a hearer or solitary realizer, as opposed to the enlightenment of a bodhisattva. Like usually when what I was describing is like the enlightenment of a bodhisattva, means full enlightenment. Whereas sometimes there's also described lower levels of enlightenment, the enlightenment of a hearer or solitary realizer, which is what like Shariputra and Moggallana are hearers, right? But that's one more technical use that you don't see as often. And then the same with nirvana. There's also actually different levels of different types of nirvana. And so yeah, actually, a synonym for full enlightenment is called non-abiding nirvana, right? But usually we don't talk about that. But then there's like a lower nirvana of like a hearer or solitary realizer, which is what we usually mean. So yeah, maybe I won't go into the detail of the differences between those, but just to know, typically enlightenment means like, it's like having completely abandoned all the gross and subtle levels of obscurations to the body and mind, and develop to perfection all positive qualities. Whereas nirvana is something much less than that. It's just freedom from suffering and samsara, freedom from samsara for oneself. Okay, Steve?
Thank you, Geshe. I guess to my ordinary mind, it seems that Prince Siddhartha would have seen, right, the people in the palace, like his parents and things aging. So I don't
I
know
know.
how we kind of think about that, but
Yeah, I don't know. I think you think of it just like a not like any other allegory. No, it's a kind of allegorical story. I know. As I explain it too, also you think, but he must have gotten sick sometimes. So there must have been other people who were sick or old. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, you just kind of have to be flexible in your mind, not try to not be too literal. No. Yeah. Um, but but another way to think of it also is to look for, well, can we find any kind of similar examples in just in people in our time, right? If you think about like, I mean, and I don't know any really wealthy, fortunate people, but like Bill Gates' children, for example. Like, someone, any children of a multimillionaire or billionaire, there must be a lot in Silicon Valley, that they just, and like they grow up and it's kind of like everything goes well, no? They never really have any severe illness. Their parents get along well. They have a nice extended family. Like there must be some people who have this kind of very privileged life. Of course, they still read the news and see about other things, but there's a big difference between like, maybe even their grandparents lived ripe old age. I know for me, when I remember my uh, when my grandmother passed away, I was so young and I hardly knew her, so didn't really impact my mind. But my grandfather, I became quite attached to when I was a little boy, even up to like 10. I think he must have passed away when I was about 10 years old. But he'd visit our family sometimes, and I idolized him and just saw him. He was a very big man, a farmer. And I just, I don't know, you idolize some people. And so when he passed away, I was really upset. It really disturbed my mind. And it was really shock, to my mind. It was really kind of, I never experienced that before, that someone I really cared about and was kind of close to, that suddenly they're gone and I'll never meet them again. So, you can imagine, it's an allegorical story, but you could try to imagine someone who, yeah, their life is just so full of kind of privilege and good fortune and just comfortable. And then suddenly they're shocked you know, by death or sickness or, old age or other misfortunes. Actually, I mean, among those people who take interest in Buddhism, who are not from Buddhist background and newly take interest in Buddhism, even among people from Buddhist background, those who suddenly, at some point in their life, they start to take Buddhist practice very seriously. It's probably common in other religious traditions too. That oftentimes it's a tragedy, severe tragedy befalling someone, like a car accident or a death of a close one, or severe illness, that causes them to suddenly think about things in a different way, right? And bring they newly value spiritual practice and think about life and death. These big questions of life and death. So, I think that the story is meant to illustrate that kind of yeah. What do you call it? It's like in a story, in a plot. In a plot, there's like the I don't know, what do you call? In like the plot of a story, you come to some kind of turning point where everything changes. I forget. There's a technical term for that. I don't remember. Um, but like that, in the story of someone's spiritual practice, sometimes there's like this powerful catalyst that causes them to radically change the course of their life. It's like that. If there's no other questions, let's take a 10-minute break now. Uh, okay. So, yeah, so just to summarize the main parts of the Buddha's life are, yeah, just to remember that no one is kind of like enlightened from, the very beginning of their continuum as a person, that all enlightened beings, including Shakyamuni Buddha, at some time in the past were an ordinary being, ordinary person like us in samsara. And then they practiced the spiritual path, gradually abandoning faults and developing positive qualities, and then gradually become enlightened. So, sometime in the past, this person who we know as Shakyamuni Buddha, he became enlightened, and then decided to take rebirth, or made prayers to show the aspect of taking rebirth at this particular time and place. So in this world system, our world system, which is actually called the Southern Continent, Jambudvipa in Sanskrit, but there's a whole Buddhist cosmology which is a bit different. But long and short, though, the Shakyamuni Buddha, this person we came to know as Shakyamuni Buddha, decided to take rebirth on planet Earth at this time, 2,500 years ago. And then so showed the aspect of taking birth into a royal family, and then, being brought up as a prince, then marrying, having a child, a son, and then leaving his wife and child and his parents in the kingdom to pursue spiritual practice and to seek a way to be free from the suffering of samsara for himself and for others. And then he practiced, for 6 years, he practiced austerities on the banks of the river Neranjan, and then found that the path of austerities would just makes one weak and one's mind unclear. So then he started taking this ordinary food in moderation, and then was able to make quick progress in his spiritual practice, and then shortly became enlightened under the Bodhi tree, and then gave a first teaching in Sarnath. And this first teaching was the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And then he went on to teach to different groups of people and individuals around in the Ganga River Valley in northern India, which stretches, all the way from I think Calcutta in the east, all the way over to like Rishikesh and near to Delhi in the west. So it's like, over, 700 miles or so. And then north to south from the border with Nepal, south to, a city in the south there. But anyway, across a broad swath of northern India, he taught for 40 years. And then he showed the aspect of passing away about the age of 80. So during that time, he became probably the most renowned and highly regarded, or definitely one of the most renowned and highly regarded teachers of his time. A contemporary of him was the founder of the Jain Buddhism, Mahavira. And then, of course, there are many other many other contemporary teachers, but their names I don't know. And then after he passed away, his foremost student was named Mahakashyapa, and he convened as kind of the leader of the Buddhist Sangha. So then maybe this is helpful to mention in context of Buddha's life. So during Buddha's life, he was very aware that he was creating a new religion, basically, our new religion. And so he would accept the way he would accept people as disciples of him, especially later in his life, and not only him, but people would be accepted as a follower of the Buddha by going for refuge to the Buddha Dharma Sangha. And to this day, this is what kind of defines what distinguishes a person from being a Buddhist versus not being a Buddhist. The main thing is going for refuge, like formally taking refuge in the Buddha and Dharma Sangha, where the Buddha is the teacher, the founding teacher. So one commits oneself to following, him as a role model, as a teacher. And then the Dharma is the teachings that he gave. And then the Sangha is the community of people who follow and practice and uphold his teachings in the world, the spiritual community. And there's, the analogy to for how those function is like a doctor, a medicine, and the nurses, right? Where the doctor is the foremost one who identifies the illness and the cause of illness and the remedy to that illness and how to have health again. And so it's like a teacher. And then the medicine is what we actually take, or the doctor's advice, is what we actually need to follow, and the medicine actually take to treat the illness. So that's like the Dharma. So it said within the three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the Dharma is the actual refuge. It's what actually protects us from suffering, is our own practice. The Buddha alone just can't, as an individual, he can't protect us from suffering. He benefits us by teaching the Dharma, and it's up to us whether we practice or not. So the Dharma is like the medicine. And then the Sangha community are like the nurses, that they also, are committed to serving the doctor and then helping others be able to follow his advice and take the treatment or the medicine. So the Sangha community, they help us to practice the Buddhist teachings. So during the Buddha's lifetime already, the Buddha established this, that for those who wish to follow him and the path, practice the path he's taught, then they should take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so he created this kind of ritual. Yeah, so then after the Buddha passed away, then Makashapa convened the first council. So there was a council of 500 arhats. So it means 500 followers of the Buddha who were fully ordained monks, and they had achieved freedom, they had achieved nirvana. They'd achieved freedom from samsara. So they'd abandoned all the afflictive emotions, anger, attachment, and ignorance, and the seeds of those, such that they would never, through the force of karma and afflictive emotions, they would never take rebirth in samsara again. So it means after they die, then they would abide in like a pure land or a state of peace. And so they had this very high level of realization of the Buddhist teachings. So after the Buddha passed away, I think about 1 year after the Buddha passed away, in that time was a great city of Rajgir. It's still a small city. I just visited actually this past winter. Visited Rajgir and stayed there one night for the first time. But there's one cave. Actually, I didn't have time to visit the cave, but there's one large cave where they convened the first council. And at that first council, it was meant to codify all of the Buddhist teachings, because different individuals had received different teachings from Shakyamuni Buddha at different times, in different places over these 40 years. So they brought together these 500 arhats because their minds are incredibly clear. They can remember word for word, like what they heard the Buddha teach. And so they took turns and each recited different parts of the Buddhist teachings that they had memorized. And they divided the Buddhist teachings into 3 groups, which are called the 3 baskets, or the 3 pitakas, the Tripitaka. And according to topic, right? So there's one group of the Buddhist teachings where the primary topic that's taught is ethics and pure morality, like all the vows and the precepts that one follows to keep pure morality. And so that is the basket of, I think, sila, or means morality. Vinaya, the Vinaya basket, there's a term. The Vinaya basket is to do with the training in pure morality. And then there's those sutras that, and so a sutra, in Buddhism, when we say sutra, we mean something spoken by the Buddha, from the Buddha's mouth, or by the Buddha himself. There's a sutra. And then there's a Vinaya basket. And then the second is the sutra basket. And those are sutras where the topic is primarily how to achieve meditative concentration. So they're related to the 3 higher trainings, right? There's a higher training in morality, higher training in meditative concentration, and a higher training in wisdom, are the 3. So the Vinaya basket is related to higher training in morality. Sutra basket are those sutras that primarily teach how to achieve or how to practice the higher training in meditative concentration. And then the Abhidharma basket, it's called Abhidharma, are sutras that primarily teach how to develop wisdom, the higher training in wisdom. And so they divided the sutras taught by the Buddha by topic, and they took turns reciting those. And so what was recited there, and so there was a kind of unanimous agreement that what we've recited, these are the actual teaching by the Buddha. Anything else that people claim to be taught by the Buddha is not, right? And so that's what happened at the first council. That's the first codification, like formal codification of the Buddhist teachings. Yeah. Then later there was a second council about 200 years after the Buddha passed away, about another, and then a third council sometime after that. Yeah, and gradually more and more, kind of more, some disagreement arose among different followers of the Buddha about what the Buddha actually taught, what the Buddha actually didn't teach, and what are the vows that monks should follow or not, and different interpretations of the vows. So different interpretations also, especially of the view of selflessness that the Buddha taught, of emptiness. The Buddha, different disagreements arose. So yeah. So once again, any questions about that parts of the Buddha's life? I think maybe it's good to mention here, I've mentioned before, I was just talking to Asha about, because she started watching, but there's this great set of videos about the Buddha's life, where the Buddha's life is kind of dramatized and reenacted by contemporary actors in India. It was made about 7 years ago or so, and it was made as a weekly series where they would have 1 week installment every week for 1 year. So for 52 kind of sessions of that. But it's very well done. So and it's fairly accurate. I mean, there's a lot of drama added, but the basic facts are pretty much as they're known now. But I found very helpful because they really make it very more lifelike. It's very easy to hear an account or read an account of the Buddha's life, and it seems something kind of far away and abstract. And it's a bit hard to really imagine what really that might have been like, for Prince Siddhartha and for other people in that time. Like, what was it really like as people? But to see it reenacted by contemporary actors, it makes it very much, I don't know, I found it gives a lot of insight into imagining, what really kind of happened. And what might it really have been like to be alive at that time. So, yeah. And then some other resources for knowing more about the Buddha's life. There's an excellent biography by Thich Nhat Hanh called Old Path, White Clouds. It's just a nice biography of the Buddha, which that series is largely based upon the biography of Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh, he, as he often does, he uses a bit of license. No, he takes a bit of liberty in kind of creatively depicting the Buddha's life in a bit non-traditional way. Although many of the stories that he includes, they are taken from sutras, right? And especially from the Vinaya Sutras. And my favorite thing about the book is in the back, for each chapter, he lists the sources, the sutras that are the sources for the main stories in that chapter. So, I think many people don't realize, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of sutras spoken by the Buddha that are available in English. The entire Pali Canon has been translated in English and is available for free online on different websites. And then the Mahayana canon of sutras, which is much larger, it's in the process of being translated by there's a organization called the 84,000 Project, which is doing an excellent job of sponsoring and organizing the translation of this much bigger body of sutras that are held to be the word of the Buddha in the Mahayana tradition. But those are also all available for free online. So it's really excellent to use, like a book like The Old Path, White Clouds, to use that resource in the back where he mentions the name of the different sutras. You can look those up and actually read the sutra itself and see, read for yourself these different events that happen in Buddha's life. There's so many really beautiful stories from the Buddha's life of things that happened. And it brings such a much richer picture to the time and the person and the different people involved. Yeah, really, really, yeah, really good. So I hope. Yeah, I don't think that series is. I don't know. Does it have subtitles in English? No, I'm sure it had. I read subtitles for sure. Yeah, I saw a version with subtitles in English. That series is the it's spoken in Hindi, right? It's nice Hindi, no? Yeah. But you can get subtitles. And then maybe one more resource, which is, I mean, quite outdated, but still very beautiful, is called The Light of Asia. It's another, it's like a poetic rendering of the life of Buddha. And might be an original poem by Sir Charles Bell. Anyway, it's called The Light of Asia. I forget if it's an original poem or if it's a translation. I know before I said it was a translation, but it might be also original. Yeah. Anyway, there's some nice, yeah, different resources about the life of the Buddha. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Lead a meditation. I guess, I don't know, why don't we meditate a little bit? Otherwise, I'm just going to talk right through 1:30. Yeah, I mean, we don't usually, I don't know, don't usually meditate that much on like the life of the Buddha. But we can. It's good to do. So why don't we, if there's no more questions right now about any of those things, why don't we meditate a little bit? So gradually focus your attention on your breath or another object of placement meditation for a couple minutes to focus, generate mental focus and to clear your mind. Mm. So then, yeah, so to reflect on the life of Shakyamuni Buddha, maybe one thing to contemplate first is, so here we are, now, um, in this course of Buddhism in a nutshell. So learning about Buddhism, this religion, this religious tradition that began with this one individual, the founding teacher of this tradition in the world, Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived 2,500 years ago. So maybe one thing to consider first is just to get a sense of just what it means that we even remember this person, 2,500 years later, after they actually lived and walked on the earth. So can you imagine someone who's alive now, who's famous or has done something to be known throughout the world? Will you imagine 2,500 years from now, they would still be remembered and admired? I think that's one helpful question to just consider. Can we, is there anyone we can think of now or even who's lived in the last, 100 or 200 years in the contemporary world, who we imagine will still be revered, admired, and looked to as a role model 2,500 years from now in the future? Mm. And then, yeah, we can also ask, well, why, what is it about Shakyamuni Buddha and his teachings, that that he's still remembered now, 2,500 years ago after he lived and taught. So in your own, according to your own understanding, yeah, why do you think, we can ask ourselves, why is it that Shakyamuni Buddha is remembered still now, 2,500 years ago after he passed away? Mm. And then especially, what we can try to imagine thinking about Shakyamuni Buddha, the person, like as an individual, think he was one person, right? Who lived for about 80 years. So just in that short period of 80 years, what an incredibly profound effect he must have had on many, many people to, to have given rise to this entire religion that still exists now, 2,500 years ago. So we can try to imagine, what it must have been like to see him or hear him speak or be in his presence or meet others who are direct disciples of his and hear them, speak about their firsthand experience of him. Mm. And then also, so just reflecting on his the story of his life. I mean, in general, we can ask what. Well, why don't we consider that? I guess. Um, Thinking over the story of the life of Shakyamuni Buddha, which is meant to be a teaching for us, then what aspects of the story can we, can oneself take inspiration from, or can one take as an example? So just consider that for yourself first. How can we take the story of his life as a teaching for ourselves? Mm. And then especially the kind of turning point in Buddha's life, or Prince Siddhartha's life, where he decided to leave the kind of luxury of his life as a prince in the palace and embark on a path of spiritual practice. Like, is that similar in any way to our own life choices? Our own life choice to pursue spiritual practice, in part through not having found real satisfaction with the ordinary things of life, like money and food, entertainment, clothes and house and job and reputation, and acquaintance with other friends and family who also lead a more or less ordinary kind of life. So can we see any similarity, maybe less extreme, but in some ways similar to the Buddha's kind of choice to leave behind, a life of luxury and just, enjoying food, clothing, relationship, family, and devote, significant time and energy to a spiritual practice, looking for some deeper, more stable, lasting well-being and satisfaction. that's less susceptible to the kind of oscillations of fortune. Mm. And then finally, maybe for a few minutes, just consider, just to conclude the meditation, like when you think of Shakyamuni Buddha, what are the essential qualities that stand out? So you have to, if you have to kind of condense your idea of what Shakyamuni Buddha is or represents or means to you in your own practice, kind of what essentially is that Shakyamuni Buddha, most poignantly represents or means for you and your own understanding or way of relating to him. Mm. Okay, and gradually conclude your meditation and relax your attention. Mm. Okay. Mm. Also there's more about, when you think about Shakyamuni Buddha, of course, he's a fully enlightened being, a Buddha. So in the Lamrim, in different Lamrim texts, there's always a section on refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. And then within that, there's outline headings about the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of his body and speech and mind. And so there, you can also read to get more idea of what, Shakyamuni Buddha is. Of course, there's a lot of questions that come up in relation to this, in the Buddha's life. It raises a lot of questions. But, for example, about past and future lives. And then, how is it possible, the whole idea of emanations, how is it possible to emanate different bodies, different places? And then, why and how does a person exist if they're, they don't take rebirth anymore through the force of karma and afflictive emotions? Then, like, what kind of existence? How do they exist? What kind of place do they exist in? And so forth. So there's a lot of, difficult issues come up in relation to, the life of Shakyamuni Buddha in general. But those are mostly a bit beyond the scope of this little introduction to Buddhism course. So The next thing I thought just to speak about briefly before we end the session is about the different kind of Buddhism. So Buddhism as it exists now, right? So I spoke about Buddhism, just what Buddhism is in general, and especially in comparison to other major world religions. And then the founder of Buddhism, Shakyamuni Buddha, and his life. So then now to think about, well, like, because this is a big source of confusion for many people that are new to Buddhism, is because there's so many varieties, no? It's like if you ask, where to find the best hamburger, like do you go to Wendy's or Burger King or go to like Jack in the Box, and why are they all different and how do they arise? There's like, there's all different lineages of burgers, right? Like that. Or a steak, even more broadly, I mean beef. No, like that, there's all different, lineages of Buddhism, and like, how did they arise and what's the difference between them? And how do you decide which one to go to, right? And which one to not? It's a source of a lot of confusion. So, maybe we just look briefly at the historical kind of development of Buddhism in the world, how it spread, how it gave rise to all these different lineages. What are some of the significant differences between them? What are those differences? And then how do we navigate that now in our own kind of path and study of Buddhist teachings? So historically, like I said, the Buddha passed away about 2,500 years ago. And you think now is the year, what is it, the Gregorian calendar? 2025, right? Which is based on related to the life of Jesus, right? So Jesus passed away, right? Born or passed away? I'm not sure. I think it starts CE. I don't know. Any of you know? Does the Gregorian calendar start when Jesus was born or when Jesus died? And anyway, it's only like 36 years different, I think, because he died quite young. Also, I was also thinking, reflecting, that's another big difference between like Christianity or Islam. Jain and Hinduism, I'm not sure, so it's a bit different, but definitely, and Judaism also. Like, I'm not sure, like Judaism also mainly has the Old Testament, right? But the Torah also, I'm not sure what that's composed of, but definitely Christianity, like you think there's no writings actually by Jesus. Like Jesus didn't write anything. And rather he gave talks, he gave teachings, and had conversations with people. I'm not sure, how much Jesus actually gave formal teachings. But what we know of Jesus is all from the Gospels, right? Where his direct disciples wrote down things about what he taught. And they each wrote different things. And apparently there are many other Gospels that were later considered not canonical, and that were left out. That's a very long story, yeah. Yeah, it's very fascinating. At one point I started looking into some of the other Gospels, the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of these other ones, Mary Magdalene, I believe. Anyway, but there's, but generally the writings or the teachings of Jesus, there's a very small body of stuff compared to, and also in Islam, the Quran is like these things that the Prophet Muhammad, that he spoke saying, and apparently he went into kind of trance and then spoke these things that were thought to have come directly from Allah, and these messages that were thought to have come directly from God, and then he spoke. But it's a relatively small body of teachings. When you compare to the sutras in Buddhism, there's so many, like there's thousands. So that's one, it's one kind of difference, because the Buddha actually, was a person who was living and teaching over 40 years from his own side, not going into trance and speaking something, taught by someone else, and not just things recorded by his, sayings and teachings he gave here and there, recorded by some disciples, but himself giving teachings to different groups of people, extensive teachings over a long time, over 40 years. So there's a huge body of advice and teachings from the Buddha. Okay, so then so then the Buddha passed away. Then there was this first council, and I don't know what was recited at the first council or whatnot. I think definitely you can say all the sutras in the Pali Canon were probably all recited there for sure. If all the sutras in the Mahayana Canon were recited at that time or not, I don't know. It's a big question. But that was 1 year after the Buddha passed away. And then about 100 years after the Buddha passed away, there was a second council held. And I don't remember the reasons for that council exactly, so I don't want to give you any wrong idea, so I just won't say. And then about 200 years after the Buddha passed away, there was a third council held. And by that time, there had arisen, actually within, you could say, there's four main kind of, well, there had arisen this fundamental division between the Mahayana and the Theravada tradition. Theravada means the tradition of the elders, right? So, so anyway, those kind of upholders of the Theravada tradition had a view that there's a much narrower set of sutras that were the word of the Buddha. And then these other sutras, there's this other body of sutras, I guess existed then, that they were considered not and a much broader interpretation. So the Theravada had a narrower interpretation of what the Buddha taught, and the Mahayana, or the Mahasamgika Sangha. So it's a division within the ordained Sangha, right? Because the ordained Sangha are considered the foremost upholders of the Buddhist tradition. And then because, of course, it's because ancient India is a very patriarchal society, it was the ordained men, mainly the monks, who were considered the main upholders. Although there were fully ordained women, I mean, that was one radical thing about the Buddha's teachings, was that he gave full ordination to women, which was, I believe, uncommon at that time. And also he allowed, in the caste system in ancient India, he allowed people irrelevant of their caste, right? Because traditionally in ancient India, it was the Brahmins. If you're born into a Brahma family, then you can practice fully like religion and be an upholder of that religion, but not if you're from the other castes, right? But the Buddha allowed people from all different castes, and even those are from the Shudra class, they're known as untouchables, the lowest caste, even to also join his order, which is also a bit revolutionary. But anyway, but still, even within the Buddhist Sangha, there was, the patriarchy is still there, right? The trappings of patriarchal society. So it was the ordained monks who were primarily considered main upholders of the tradition. So in this third council, 200 years after the Buddha passed away, or 200 or 300 years, then there was already this kind of, these two primary factions that developed. The Theravada, kind of the elders, and then the Mahas, who had a narrower interpretation of what the Buddha is. They held that the Buddha, when he died, his continuum ceased, and that only very specific, very few beings have the potential to achieve enlightenment. Actually, I can't, even though I've studied Buddhism in a monastic university for 20 years, like studying history, like we don't study history. It's really not part of what we study very much. So even when I speak about these historical things, like I know little bits and pieces, but I don't have a good comprehensive understanding. So even as I'm saying about the third council and what the difference was, like I know I've read it a couple times, but I don't remember that clearly. So maybe it's better I don't say too much. But typically, but I do know like these different divisions arose even in ancient India. So even without looking about how Buddhism changed as it spread to different regions in the world, like China, Sri Lanka, then later Burma, and then of course then later Korea, eventually Tibet and Japan. Like already in ancient India, there were differences in different schools of Buddhist thought, right? And they had different ideas, different interpretations, different ways of thinking about what the Buddha was as a person, and how to interpret his teachings, and who can achieve enlightenment and who can't. What happened when the Buddha passed away? Was Shakyamuni Buddha, was he actually enlightened in that life, or was he enlightened before, as I already mentioned? So there were different ideas arising. But the main, in one way, like in Buddhism, the main lineages of Buddhism are associated with lineages of ordination, because it was the ordained Sangha, those who left the home life and then went forth as Buddhist monastics, monks or nuns, they've always been, since the life of the Buddha until now, they're kind of at the center of the Buddhist world, right? They're the ones primarily responsible for upholding Buddhist teachings in the world, because they're the ones who That's their job, right? They give up other work. They're not allowed to work for money. They should live on the generosity and charity of others. Originally begged for food, but now that's not so practical. So they just live on, more general charity of others. And then they devote their time and energy to studying and meditating, practicing, meditating on, teaching, and in general serving the Buddhist teachings in different capacities. So at the center of these different divisions of Buddhist teachings, they go hand in hand with different lineages of ordination, right? There were different lineages of ordination. And now in the world, there's 3 different lineages of ordination, but they all come from Shakyamuni Buddha. So there's, in the Chinese tradition, it's called the Dharmagupta lineage of ordination. And then in the Theravada tradition, it's called the Theravada lineage. And then in the Tibetan lineage, it's called, the Sanskrit term is the Mula Savastavarta, or it's, I don't know, it's a bit difficult to translate those terms, and it doesn't really help when you translate, but Mula Savastavarta lineage. So there's only one lineage of ordination in the Tibetan tradition. And there's some, basically, like, the vows for the most part are pretty much the same, but there's some slight differences. For example, in the Mula Savastavarta lineage of ordination, it's held that in order to take the vows of a monk or nun, or even refuge vows, you have to have, at the time of taking the vows, you have to have the intention to keep those for the rest of your life, right? So if you take a vow to not kill, you have to have the intention to keep that vow for the rest of your life. Whereas in the Theravada tradition, that's not the case. Like, when you take a vow of a monk or nun, you can just have the intention to keep that for a month or a year or, a few years or a shorter amount of time. It's a fairly minor difference, but so there's some minor differences like those. Okay, but yeah, maybe to keep it simple though, so there were already some differences in ancient India, and then, but from ancient India, the Buddhism gradually spread to other parts of the world. So the first place it spread to was Sri Lanka, right? The famous King Ashoka, the famous Buddhist king in Sri Lanka, that was probably the height of the spread of Buddhism in northern India, was during the reign of King Ashoka. He sent his son, I think first his son and then later his daughter. Anyway, but both his son and daughter were said to have gone to Sri Lanka, and they were both Buddhist monastics. And his son was named Mahinda, and there's a place in Sri Lanka where he's said to have first gone when he arrived there, and he just went and did meditation retreat, and then gradually he became known in the area, and the local king came to meet him, and was so impressed that he became a student, a disciple of King Mahinda, and so he was the first Buddhist king in Sri Lanka. And then later, King Ashoka's daughter, and there's a famous contemporary beautiful painting of King Ashoka's daughter, who I don't remember her name, but anyway, of sailing on a ship to Sri Lanka. It's painted by a famous Sri Lankan artist, carrying a branch of the Bodhi tree, right? So when she went to Sri Lanka, she brought a clipping from the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya and brought there. And that tree is still alive now. It's one of the oldest known trees, cultivated trees in the world. And actually the tree in Bodh Gaya now is a clipping from there, from Sri Lanka, because the tree in Bodh Gaya was cut down several times. And eventually they brought a clipping back from Sri Lanka, and it's still there now. So Buddhism first spread from in ancient India to Sri Lanka, and it exists in Sri Lanka until now. Sri Lanka is a Buddhist country now, even till now. And then I believe from Sri Lanka spread to Burma, and then much later to Thailand, right? And so all those countries, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, are upholders of the Theravada lineage of Buddhism. And you'll see, like, one thing that's different about the Theravada is it's considered that, not everyone has the potential to achieve full enlightenment. Only particular individuals have the potential to achieve full enlightenment. Everyone has the potential to be free from samsara, to achieve nirvana, which is freedom from samsara, but not everyone has the potential to achieve full enlightenment, only kind of a few individuals, particular people. And also it's considered, a big difference in the Theravada is that when once one achieves nirvana or moksha, then one dies, one's continuum ceases to exist, just like the Buddhas did at the time he passed away. And so that's very different. Um, and then there's a slightly different emphasis on like in the practice, right? Where so of course in the Theravada, there's not, because it's not believed that everyone has the potential to achieve enlightenment, so there's not this big emphasis on bodhicitta, the aspiration to achieve enlightenment. That'd be ridiculous, right? If you're aspiring to achieve something that you don't have it's impossible to achieve. So there's not that emphasis on bodhicitta, which you find in the Mahayana tradition. And the emphasis is much more on the 3 higher trainings and called the Eightfold Noble Path, right? Which is like, I'm not sure I can list them all, but it's right view, right action, right speech, right behavior, right concentration, right livelihood, right morality, I believe, and a couple others I'm missing. But that's very prominent. That's also taught in the Mahayana tradition, but it's not so much a central kind of way of thinking about how to structure practice. Whereas in Theravada, that's very essential, the Eightfold Noble Path. But the teaching of the Four Noble Truths is the same for both. And the 3 higher trainings, the higher training in morality, in meditative concentration, and wisdom is the same in both. And the importance of generating the wisdom of selflessness, right, is the same in both. And renunciation, the importance of generating a kind of a healthy aversion to objects of attachment, recognizing that as long as we chase after objects of attachment, they won't fundamentally satisfy us, and they'll rather lead us into disappointment again and again, and keep us trapped in this cycle of kind of pleasure and then craving, and pleasure and craving again and again, which is samsara. So they have that in common. And then the monastic vows, they're almost identical. They have that in common. And refuge, the difference between being a Buddhist versus not being a Buddhist is going for refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. That's also the same. So mostly, very much the same. But you also find, another big difference between the Mahayana and Theravada is in the Theravada you find much more, especially for people who want to seriously practice Buddhism, there's much more emphasis on just meditating, doing meditation, and especially placement meditation. You try to generate mental focus, watching the breath, anapanasati. Whereas in the Mahayana, you find a bigger emphasis on, yes, there's meditation, but a big emphasis on explanation of what the Buddha taught, and getting a very good intellectual understanding, conceptual understanding of everything the Buddha taught, and then practicing within that based on reasoning and analytical meditation. So there's a very strong emphasis. But in the Mahayana traditions, this is different, because in Zen Buddhism, you don't see that. In the Tibetan Buddhism, you see this very strongly, emphasis on analytical meditation, where you think about different issues and questions and try to generate a good conceptual understanding, and then use that as a basis for transforming one's mind, right? So first Buddhism spread to Sri Lanka, and then from there to Burma, Thailand. That's the Theravada tradition. And then also from ancient India, Buddhism, probably the second oldest place it spread to was to China. Like, I'm not sure about the dates. I think like between 300 and 500 years after the Buddha passed away, there were pilgrims, several famous pilgrims from ancient China who came to India and stayed, many years, and learned Sanskrit and translated text, and then collected texts and teachings and brought different sutras back to ancient China, and then began translating those. So there's, and many hundreds and thousands of sutras were brought back to ancient China. The Chinese canon of sutras is almost as big as the Tibetan. I don't think it's quite as big, but it's almost as big. And there's some sutras that were translated from ancient Sanskrit to Chinese that were not translated to Tibetan, right? And vice versa. There's some that were in Tibetan and not in Chinese, but largely they're very similar. And so primary among those was the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, right? And the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras is a huge body of sutras where the Buddha taught the Bodhisattva path, like how a person becomes fully enlightened, and this idea that everyone has the potential to become fully enlightened. And so that's a big sticking point between the two traditions. Like, and the Theravada, they don't accept that whole body of sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. They say that's not the word of the Buddha. That's something that was made up later on, right? Whereas in the Tibetan and the Chinese and the Northern Buddhism, you can say Korean, Japanese, they all accept those as actually being the word of the Buddha. But you can see the nature and character of those sutras varies radically from those sutras in the Pali Canon. Those sutras in the Pali Canon, they're much, they're much more just bound to kind of this world and very similar to our ordinary appearance. I mean, some mystical things, but quite close to our ordinary perception of things. The Mahayana Sutras are just incredibly vast. All kinds of infinite world systems and infinite past and infinite Buddhas and infinite Pure Lands and all kinds of miraculous things happening and very diverse and complex. Yeah. So, I mean, but maybe I'll come back to that, but just to wrap up, so that's where a big question comes. Well, what am I supposed to do, as an individual approaching Buddhism? Buddhism from ancient India first spread to Sri Lanka, then spread to China, then from China gradually spread to. So in China, already in China, ancient China itself, two kind of different schools of practice arose with slightly different emphasis. One school, it's called the Pure Land school. And so based on some Mahayana sutras, the practice is primarily to recite different sutras, like the Lotus Flower Sutra or the Avatamsaka Sutra, White Lotus Sutra, and others, and recite, so to recite sutras, chant the names of different Buddhas, and make prayers to be reborn in a Pure Land. Like Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land is the main one. That's like just yesterday in Boulder Creek, actually one guy said something to me like, "Oh, praise Amitabha Buddha," which he must have some connection with the Chinese Buddhism in the area. There's some Chinese Buddhist temples in this area. So in ancient China already there was this Pure Land practice, and then Zen or Chan in Chinese called Chan, and then when it went to Japan, they pronounced Chan as Zen, right? Zen Buddhism. So there, the emphasis of practice is much more on, and it comes from, I think it's the Lotus Sutra actually. There's one famous sutra apparently where the Buddha, he's asked to give a teaching, and he holds up a lotus flower and remains silent, right? He just holds up a lotus flower, and then that is the teaching. But Mahakashapa was held to be the first patriarch, he's called, that he understood directly. It was like a mind-to-mind transmission where Mahakashapa understood what the Buddha taught, and independence upon just the Buddha holding up a flower, Mahakashapa developed his initial insight into emptiness, into selflessness. And so the emphasis in the Chan or Zen tradition is not so much on reading sutras and reciting the names of different Buddhas and making prayers to take rebirth in a Pure Land. Because the idea of taking rebirth in a Pure Land is that it's much more easy to practice. You take rebirth in a place and in a kind of, with a body and in an environment where you're just surrounded, you're in the you can directly perceive Buddhas, you're surrounded by bodhisattvas and other people, and just like all you do day and night is practice. And so you can very quickly generate realizations on the path and become enlightened in this Pure Land. Whereas now in this life with this body, it's very difficult to practice, right? So that's the idea of the Pure Land practice. Whereas Zen Buddhism is the emphasis is much more on meditation, on very austere meditation, and just directly looking at the mind and the nature of one's mind, and trying to break through our ordinary concepts that keep us bound in kind of dualistic perception of self and other, of good and bad, of this and that, to break through to a direct experience of ultimate nature, right? So that already existed in ancient China and then was very much developed in Japan, right? And is very much present when Buddhism first came to the United States. There was some, what is it, Suzuki. I don't remember his full name. Anyway, there were several great Japanese masters, were some of the first Buddhist masters to come teach in the United States, Suzuki being one of them. And that's why Zen is very popular in the United States. There's a lot more Zen centers and Zen practitioners than there are Tibetan Buddhists. Tibetan Buddhists came later in the 70s. So Zen Buddhist masters were already coming to the US to teach from the 50s with the beatniks, in the San Francisco area. Actually, Allen Ginsberg and Gary Snyder and others. Jack Kerouac and that whole crew. Yeah. And then some Theravada masters were also coming also later after the Zen. Zen was first, I believe, in the US. And then, but Buddhism only started spreading to Tibet about 1000 CE or 800 CE, probably 800 CE. So after, a bit later. But at that time, Buddhism was, kind of at the height of its development in ancient India, and Tantra had arisen. Like the Buddhist Tantras has also become widely known and were widely practiced in ancient India. So because of, geographically, relative to Sri Lanka or China, Tibet is closer to northern India, right? It's just maybe a month walk or something between the two. Then, Tibetans came to ancient India, and Buddhist masters from ancient India went to Tibet over the course of about probably 500 years. There was this, go back and forth between. So the Tibetans really were able to learn and receive teachings on, and then translate kind of the whole breadth of the Buddhist treaties, sutras, and the ancient Indian commentaries on the sutras by mainly the masters of ancient Nalanda University, like Nagarjuna, Asanga, Aryadeva, Chandakirti, and others. More so than any of the other, than in China or Sri Lanka, right? So the largest body of, and then after that, gradually Buddhism declined for different reasons. Buddhism declined in ancient India. One reason was they lost patronage. They lost out to the Hindus and the Jain practitioners. And then another big probably cause for decline was the invasion of different Muslim rulers, right? And the persecution of Buddhism and other religions in ancient India. And then also probably corruption within the Buddhist Sangha itself. What did I heard some other idea about why Buddhism declined recently? But I don't remember it now. Anyway, it's not exactly known why Buddhism so utterly declined until such that now in India, it's very rare to find people whose families are, Buddhist from, 1,000 years ago or more, right? You just almost don't find that now in India. There still is a little bit, but not much. It almost completely died out. Yeah. Well, the thing hanging here is so how to navigate ourselves. Basically, we just have a few minutes left, so maybe I should stop and see if there's any questions about any of those things. I can come back to this tomorrow. Maybe that's a good place to pick up tomorrow. No? No questions about the spread of Buddhism in the world? You go ahead.
So the Zen Buddhism and Chan Buddhism, are they part of Mahayana or Theravada?
Mahayana. Yeah.
So they all believe in bodhicitta. Everybody has a potential to become enlightened, and you practice for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Yeah, definitely. They are, because so Zen Buddhism is in Japan. The same kind of form of practice in ancient China or current China is Chan Buddhism. Yes, they're both part of the Mahayana Buddhism, and they both, because the first thing you asked was if they both believe everybody has the potential to achieve full enlightenment. That I'm not sure, because even within Mahayana Buddhism, there's different schools. There's the mind-only school, and then the two main ones are the mind-only school, and then the consequentialist middle way, the middle way school. Within the middle way school, there's a couple different ones, but the main one is the middle way consequentialist school. So there's different opinion, and according to the mind-only school, and then within the mind-only school, there's different sub-schools, right? But yeah, there's a lot of diversity. But I think the main view, the main view is that yes, everyone has the potential to achieve enlightenment. The whole idea of Buddha nature is most developed in the mind-only school, right? And so yeah, for the most part, yes, but it's not universal held. Yeah, and actually, it's not something I've asked. I need to ask some of my Zen friends about. It's not something I've asked, people who actually practice in the Zen tradition about. I don't remember what they say about it. They do a lot of meditation.
Yeah, so Zen, they do a lot of meditation. They don't have really many objects. They just kind of keep everything very minimal.
Yeah,
So,
it's quite a minimalistic sort of style of practice,
yes,
Zen.
yes. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Margaret, Beth, Lindsay, you have any questions? No? Okay. Is this helpful? Yeah, okay. Otherwise, if it's not helpful, you have to tell me what you want to know about. No. Very helpful. Okay, no questions. Okay. That's very to the point. Yeah, because I do want to, we only have one more session, right, tomorrow, from 10:30 to 1:30 tomorrow. And I do want to make sure if there's anything like you really want to know about, about this, about Buddhism, please tell me. Okay, good. You have to, make sure you get your questions answered, right? So you have to tell me. Otherwise, so the plan for tomorrow, we're out of time for today. The plan for tomorrow is, I'll speak a little bit about, how to navigate all these different schools of Buddhism, and how to decide, what to focus on, what not. Basically, it's your personal choice, what you find helpful. But within that, there is some other advice. So we'll begin with that. And then we'll look at, the essential, Buddha's essential teachings, the Four Noble Truths, right? And how all of the Buddhists, what are the Four Noble Truths? And then how all the Buddhist teachings fit within the Four Noble Truths. And then maybe also another way of organizing the Buddhist teachings, which is unique to the Tibetan tradition. I also do want to clear up some doubts about the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism. And then also, what is Tantra? Because I know there's a lot of questions about that, like how does that fit in? How is Tantra part of Buddhism? But in the Tibetan tradition also, another way, a very helpful way of organizing the Buddhist teachings into it's called the Lamrim, the graduated stages of the path to enlightenment, and how that's kind of organized and how that relates to the broader kind of, the other traditions of Buddhism. So that's the plan for tomorrow. Okay, let's dedicate briefly now. So think of whatever merit we've created from the beginning of the session, of generating remember your positive motivation at the beginning, the outset of the session. And think of all the merit we've created through our meditation and discussion and so forth, and thinking about listening and thinking about things. And rejoice. Think how excellent it is. Rejoice in one's own effort. Rejoice in the effort of all those other participants in the course. And then rejoice in all those, through the from generation to generation, from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha down to now, who've made this opportunity available to us now. And then rejoice in all the, all the virtuous activity, beneficial activity engaged in by countless other ordinary people like us throughout the world. And all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all enlightened beings. So by the force of this virtue, may may Buddhism remain long in the world and flourish, and all the other spiritual traditions and teachers who bring a genuine benefit to beings. May all the teachers live long and all traditions flourish. And also all the different religious traditions and practitioners and all beings in general live in harmony with loving kindness and respect for one another. Just to keep it short then. In short, may all beings be free from every form of suffering and the causes of suffering, and have every form of well-being and happiness, of body and mind up to full enlightenment. And especially may the center, Ocean of Compassion Buddhist Center, hosting this course, may the center be able to have the best possible situation for their premises come about, whether they're able to stay in the current premises or be able to quickly find a suitable new premises at a reasonable cost. Since there's a big question about, if the center has to move or not, and where, if so, where to move. So may the center have every conducive condition to be able to continue offering programs like this in the future. And then bring to mind any other prayers you personally would like to make. So may all of your own prayers be accomplished in accordance with your wishes. Okay, thank you, and hope we meet again tomorrow. Enjoy your afternoon.